Hi, everybody. Welcome to Energizing Excellence, Texas Institutions and the Boyer 2030 Commission Report, co-hosted by the Council of Public University Presidents and Chancellors, CPUPC, the Texas Council of Chief Academic Officers, TCCAO, and the Association for Undergraduate Education at Research Universities, UERU. I am Jessica Murphy, Dean of Undergraduate Education at the University of Texas at Dallas. We are delighted to welcome participants from universities of many types to this webinar addressing the 11 recommendations provided by the Boyer 2030 Commission's report, but here, in case you haven't seen it lately, the Equity Excellence Imperative, a 2030 blueprint for undergraduate education at U.S. research universities. You should see a link to the report in the chat. Thank you, Liz. We will open today with a review of the Boyer 2030 Commission report and recommendations, followed by insights from Texas institution representatives as they progress in the implementation of the Boyer 2030 Commission report's recommendations. Regardless of your research enterprise, the report's recommendations will hopefully resonate for your campus context. At UT Dallas, for example, we have been using the report as a springboard for discussions on scaling practices up to reach more students. Before we begin, I would like to share a couple of housekeeping notes with you about the webinar. Firstly, a big thank you to Liz Bennett for organizing and managing the Zoom webinar technology, and a thank you to Mariah Persley, who may be working with Liz today. Our panelists have indicated that they can remain connected an additional 15 to 20 minutes after the webinar has ended if there is interest. We will have auto transcription enabled for live captions during the webinar. The webinar will be recorded, captioned, and distributed to attendees. Please feel free to send this link to your colleagues who couldn't make it. Please use the Q&A feature to submit questions for the panelists throughout the session. The chat will be enabled and we will be monitoring it, but the Q&A will be the most effective way to submit your questions for the Q&A session. It is now my genuine pleasure to introduce our first speakers today. Beth Loizeaux is Special Advisor to the Provost, past Associate Provost for Undergraduate Affairs, and Professor of English Emerita at Boston University. As former President of the Association of Undergraduate Education at Research Universities, UERU, she served as ex officio member of the UERU-convened Boyer 2030 Commission. As Associate Provost for Undergraduate Affairs, Beth provided leadership on a host of core academic efforts, working closely with Boston University's 17 schools and colleges to promote collaboration and strengthen the undergraduate experience. She led the development of BU's first university-wide general education program, the BU Hub, established the Advising Network, expanded the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program, and helped initiate BU's educational technology strategy and enhance the Center for Teaching and Learning. Beth previously served as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and Professor of English in the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland, College Park. She earned a BA from Mount Holyoke College and an MA and PhD from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Stephen P. Dandaneau is Associate Provost at Colorado State University and Executive Director of UERU. In these roles, Steve provides executive leadership for a national consortium of leading research universities focused on equity excellence in undergraduate education and collaborates with colleagues to strengthen the undergraduate experience at CSU. Dandaneau previously served as Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies at Kansas State University, Associate Provost and Director of the Chancellors Honors and Haslam Scholars Program at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Visiting Professor of Sociology at the University of Maryland, College Park, and the Director of the University Honors and John W. Barry Senior Scholars Program at the University of Dayton. He earned a BA in Economics with honors from Michigan State University and an MA and a PhD in Sociology from Brandeis University. Welcome to Beth and Steve.
Jessica, thank you for the introduction. Awfully kind of you, appreciate it. And Beth and I are both just delighted and honored to have this opportunity to share about the Boyer 2030 Commission report, which has been emphasized is free, available to you all for download, or if you're interested, you can purchase it as well from the University Press of Colorado, both at the UERU.org website. So Beth's going to handle the lion's share of today's presentation because she is a member of the commission. And in my role as the executive director, I just wanted to maybe share a little bit of, just very briefly with you about UERU. But first, why don't we go ahead and scroll to the next page. Thank you, Beth. This is the Boyer Commission itself, the Boyer 2030 Commission. And as I think probably everyone on this webinar is very well familiar, the term Boyer Commission comes from the 1998 Boyer Report, which was the brainchild of Shirley Strum Kinney, then president of SUNY Stony Brook. And Dr. Strum Kinney and her husband, Bob, helped put together this report, the original Boyer Report, and are great supporters of UERU today and of this report. And you can see we have a terrific group of leaders in higher education who came together, chaired by Barbara Snyder, the president of AAU, and Peter McPherson, who during the entire time that we worked on the report was president of APLU, is now emeritus in that role, and all those folks you see listed there. I think it was Dr. Holmes who pointed out to me, Archie Holmes of the UT system, that none of these folks represent Texas institutions. It is what can you say? I don't know, it feels like a failing, a glaring omission. If we can get past that, we'll hopefully offer something still of value to you in the state of Texas. So I just wanted to mention a little bit about UERU. We've already learned how to pronounce it. It sounds Australian. Association for Undergraduate Education at Research Universities, dropping that association and just emphasizing undergraduate education at research universities, UERU, 113 member institutions, 10 of which are in Texas, and in existence now for going on 23 years, working very hard to improve, as was stated, equity and excellence in undergraduate education. And let me just share just a couple words about what I've done today, which I think is as good an introduction to what we do as the slide. This morning, I had the great privilege of connecting with colleagues at UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio, who are a part of a 30 university group working on curricular analytics funded by Ascendium. As you see there, $1.99 million grant over 3 years. And that's true of 6 universities in Texas are part of that 30 university group, all represented on the call today. And boy, the folks down at San Antonio, they are just knocking it out of the park. I have to say, no offense to anyone else, but gosh, they're doing such a great job with thinking systematically about how to use this tool to improve equity and excellence on their campus. So impressive. And that's true of, what people are doing in this group all around, but it was just today. So gosh, I had to call them out because it was so impressive. And then, later today, I was making an appointment with some of us, including Beth, to visit with Undersecretary of Education, James Gvall, during a trip about a month from now to DC. He spoke at our national conference in November of last year and wants to circle back and talk with us about what we're doing both in the Curricular Analytics Project, this Boyer 2030 report. All of this is of great interest to national policymakers, and we think the state level policymakers as well. We hope to speak to the governors later this year about this report. So that was happening today, but the real highlight for me today is this opportunity, Beth and I having a chance to talk with you all, where thank you so much for your time. And I have to say, before I turn things over to Dr. Loizeaux, is that, maybe even though no one from Texas is represented on the commission, in a way, Texas has been essential to our work in UERU. Archie Holmes, just to take one example, a native of Texas and an alumnus of Texas University and a former faculty member at a Texas institution, and now in his role at the UT System Office of Leadership. No one's been a greater support for UERU than Dr. Archie Holmes. He served for 2 full terms on our board, our elected board, and in so many ways has helped contribute to our capacity to be in a position to offer the Boyer 2030 report to U.S. higher education, have a curricular analytics project as successful as it has been, and in so many other ways, serve undergraduate students and undergraduate programs around the country. So we thank Dr. Holmes. We thank all of you for your time and attention, and it's my pleasure to turn things over to Beth Loizeaux.
Well, thank you everybody for being here today and for the opportunity to talk with you. Maybe the main question that first comes to mind is why on earth would we want a Boyer 2030 commission? The UERU convened that commission in spring of 2021. In the wake of what we thought at the moment was in the wake of the pandemic. Turned out we weren't done with it. The full answer is that the world has changed since 1998 in the original Boyer report. And those changes were highlighted by what happened during the pandemic. We've got deep-seated inequities that have come to light, long overdue racial reckoning, climate concerns that have become an existential climate, mental health crises with which we are, many of us are dealing on our campuses and across our society, fragile and, as we know, fractured democracy at home and abroad, and growing public distrust of faction with higher education. Much has been accomplished in the 20 years in undergraduate education at research universities since the Boyer report. But again, the pandemic exposed those fault lines and opened, crucially, an opportunity. We look around the country and see universities not resetting to 2019. The pandemic showed that we could change, that we had the capacity to change, and it highlighted the reasons for changing. We've got a changing demographic, more diverse and older college-going population. Cost of higher education is skyrocketing, as is student debt, and again, eroded trust in higher education. So it seemed high time to go back and take a look at what we had accomplished and needed to be done. So the commission first gathered in August of 2021, and were given the charge to develop a blueprint for excellence and equity in undergraduate education at America's research universities, and to build on that landmark 98 Boyer report. To take a look at its accomplishments that have been done, what still needed to be done, and to set out an updated vision for advancing undergraduate education at our research universities. The commission was to consult broadly, and that blueprint was to provide key touch points in research and UERU's collective work with them through at least 2040. So of course, the first thing that the commission did was in its in-person meeting in November of 2021 in DC, is it decided to rename itself the Boyer 2030 report, because as the commission talked, they decided that the changes that needed to happen were so urgent that 2040 was too long a horizon, a time horizon. So we became the Boyer 2030 Commission. We worked over the next year with virtual and in-person meetings. We undertook 12 information gathering sessions, talking to colleagues around the country about some promising practices that they were undertaking to address the issues that I think are fairly well known, and that the commission wanted to call out. And these included, of course, our colleagues that you're going to hear from later at UTEP and at Boston. We undertook consultations with stakeholders, including presidents, provosts, many others as well, funders, talked to some business people, et cetera. We gathered research, we gathered data, and we spent about 8 months going around and around about how we wanted to present this report. And all of this work was supported generously by the Briggs Foundation and the Souter Foundation. Now, as many of you know, there's a lot coming at us in higher education, reports left and right, it seems. So what's distinctive about this particular report? I think the first thing to point out is its key idea that is embodied in the title, the Equity Excellence Imperative. And this is really, in many, many ways, a call to recenter, to the public mission of higher education in a democracy, which is to make transformative education, liberating education, education that a healthy democracy needs, achievable, it's not just for some students, but for all students. And one marker that the commission took for that was that selectivity seems to have become one of the beacons of excellence. And the commission to turn that around and to say we should not be measured by who we keep out, but by who we accept and how well we support and educate all of those who are seeking higher education. So excellence and equity, we decide were inextricably entwined, marked by that slash mark. Excellence without equity is privilege reproducing privilege, true excellence, and equity, mere access to higher education without excellence, is an unfulfilled promise. Primary audience for the report was going to be presidents, provosts, and other senior research university leaders. In other words, all of you who have the power to set the directions for your universities, who have the power to convene those who need to consult with each other, and who have the power to foster the change that I think we all understand is so needed. We wanted to proceed not just with grand vision, but also with actionable strategies, and under the belief that partnerships are the best way, the most powerful way for us to undertake change across higher education. And we wanted to call on those successful practices and promising experiments, as well as leading edge thinking to spur the change. Barbara Snyder did a really nice job in summing this all up so succinctly in an article in the Chronicle. She said that in today's world, you cannot be an excellent institution if you are also an inclusive and equitable institution. So the commission set out 11 provocations for equity and excellence, divided into 5 areas, and really meant to ask questions, to spur conversation, again, to offer examples that we hope will be inspiring. And I am just going to run through these very quickly, so that we can come back to them if we would like to during the Q&A. Number 1. World readiness for all. We borrow that phrase from the higher education scholar Kathy Davidson. But what we mean by that is education for life, work, and citizenship. All 3 of those for all of our students. Work, crucially, of course, but also that broader for life and for citizenship conceived broadly. Are we going to prioritize that kind of transformative education in an age of daunting challenges and need where interdisciplinarity is required for us to be able to actually grab hold of the complex issues that face us? And again, are we going to ensure such education for all students? Freedom of speech and expressive campus cultures, something that we all are dealing with every day, are involved in the development of world readiness. How can we nurture trust within university communities and build student for leadership in a democratic society, leadership in a society where people need to listen to each other, to hear different points of view, to understand different points of view, to gather evidence, and to think deeply about, again, the issues that are facing us, be those broad social issues, personal issues, the gamut. Equity and excellence in teaching and learning. Again, not just access to higher education, but access to excellence once students are there. One of the things that we discovered was that many of the wonderful recommendations for the Boyer Commission report of 1998 were available at many of our campuses, but only to a select, often kind of competitively chosen group of students. So how can those high impact practices, hallmarks of excellence, to all? And we're talking here about such things as undergraduate research, internships, experiential learning, living learning communities, those kinds of things that we know leave a lasting impression, form that kind of transformation. Teaching. I was telling my daughter, who is a PhD student at the moment, that yeah, the things that are bothering her were bothering me when I was a graduate student. To hear that. We know we have done a lot of research. Research universities have done a lot of research on what it means to teach, on what are the best teaching practices, and yet there are way too many classrooms in which those practices are not put into practice. So how are we going to ensure that all of our students, and we mean absolutely all of them without exception, are educated using evidence-informed pedagogies in intentionally inclusive and empathy-based environments? What are we doing to support our faculty? What are we doing to support our graduate students? What are we doing to support our staff who are in with our students who are in teaching positions for our undergraduates? Advising. One of the most important functions of our universities, our complex universities, is helping our students navigate them, helping them find their way. And how can we do that? How can we ensure that all students receive excellent advising, by which the commission means holistic advising, student-centered, encompasses academic, career, and basic needs guidance, so that students can best benefit from our complex institutions. Faculty rewards and structure, something that was highlighted in the 1998 Boyer report, and that some universities are beginning to make changes in. We know that our faculty rewards and structure do not necessarily highlight education. How can we best recognize, support, and reward faculty across all appointment types for the expertise and dedication they bring to achieving equitable excellence in undergraduate education? We have incredibly talented faculty who are inequitably supported, inequitably treated within our structures and within our reward systems. So what can we do to make our institutions equitable and fair and support undergraduate education in those ways? Creating success and eliminating barriers. One of the things we've noticed in going around to the various universities is the extent to which students are often facing barriers that we ourselves have unintentionally created, often with the best of intentions. So access and affordability. How are we going to recruit and best support undergraduates from diverse communities and include them in the empowering academic programs and scholarly that are aimed at advancing the quality of human experience in the US and worldwide? What we offer at research universities is amazing. How are we going to get our students into that enterprise? How are we going to show it is, and how are we going to support them once they are here? Degree pathways. We faculty put many barriers in the ways in the path of our students. And we see that there are some pathways through degrees that are actually facilitating. So we want to address both of those things. How can we identify the curricular and other opportunities to facilitate degree completion and leverage and enhance them? And then how are we going to identify curricular and other similarly institutional barriers to degree completion and remove them? And again, in the Q&A, we can talk about some of the specifics that we would like, if you would like. Technology is all around us. It was barely in existence when the original Boyer report was issued. We had email, but no phones. None of the things that we relied on to get us through the pandemic. And so the big question is, how can we use technology strategically? So not just throwing technology at the problems, but strategically and in ways that are sustainable to ambitiously scale up equity and excellence in undergraduate education. In other words, how can we think about how we create equity and excellence combined together and see the ways in which technology can help enable us to scale those things that we know are excellence and promote equitability. Fostering belonging and equitable campus culture is clearly related also to questions of free speech, but we highlight here nurturing mental health and well-being. So how can we support belonging in the university community as we come out of the pandemic, as our students feel the pressures of the world that we are leaving to them? How can we identify and eliminate policies or practices of our own making, again, that exacerbate mental health problems and which we know disproportionately affect students from underrepresented groups? And here we mean first generation, low income students of color. And finally, leading change. Assessment and accountability are necessary for us to be able to lead change at our institutions. So how can we best assess progress toward meeting the equity excellence imperative? How should we hold ourselves accountable? What are the metrics that we need to gather? What is the qualitative data that we need to gather in order to assess whether we are making in this great enterprise of equity and it's in the name of the public good? The report also goes on to offer strategies for presidents, chancellors, and provosts, as well as for undergraduate vice provosts and strategies for boards. I thought I would talk just very briefly in the 45 seconds I believe I have left about the strategies for presidents, chancellors, and provosts, for those of you here who want to know what we've gleaned in our conversations with each other and our consultations. Top of the list, as you know already, is communicate, communicate, communicate. And two topics that emerged in an urgent way for the commission. The first is to communicate about undergraduate excellence in undergraduate education, crucial mission that serves the public good. And I'm talking again about education, yes, for jobs, but also for citizenship and for life, that broad kind of education. And communicating also to students and to their parents, to legislators, to the general public, that we need all three kinds of education. Yes, again, work, also life and citizenship. We need it for all students, for those students who already know the importance of a broad education. We would urge presidents, chancellors, and provosts to develop a data-informed plan for equitable student success. We would urge them to be inclusive in their planning. And we have found in talking to people that departments can be a powerful locus of rethinking education for and equity. So pulling in at the very beginning is important, as is pulling in the expertise of support units such as your centers for teaching and learning, your institutional research offices to help in the developing of your plan. We urge you to design and implement an intentional process to create a more equitable faculty structure that is aligned with the mission of excellence and equity in undergraduate education, to institutionalize equity and excellence in undergraduate education through your hiring people who are devoted to that, who have the experience, the will, the knowledge to educate our undergraduates to the highest level and to support those undergraduates. To ensure excellence in teaching through merit, promotion, and tenure across all ranks of faculty who are in the classroom. To work with the boards, state system leaders, accrediting bodies, policymakers, public officials to create standards and measures of progress. We know that our commonly held data are not adequate to the task that we are setting ourselves. And we know that we need to band together to create a common set of data. And then to collaborate with other universities on cross-institutional reforms, in which effort, of course, UERU can help, but there are many other groups that are banding together to to tackle particular issues. So let me leave you with that, and I want to turn things over to my colleague Archie Holmes, and to introduce him to you. Archie is the Executive Vice Chancellor, as you probably all know, for Academic Affairs at the University of Texas System, former Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at the University of Virginia, and much missed colleague, member of the board of UERU. So Archie, let me turn it over to.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Before I get over and introduce our panels and start a conversation with them, please, as you have questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom. Please do use that. We are hoping to have a conversation amongst colleagues as opposed to me, excuse me, just asking questions of each of our panelists. But I'm really excited that 4 colleagues of mine from across the state are here to talk about the wonderful work that is happening at their institutions, to give us some important context for how this work can go. So I will first start with Wes Null, who serves as Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education at Baylor University, a position that he has held for a while now, since January of 2011. Dr. Hilary Prochnow, who's the Assistant Dean for Undergraduate Equity and Excellence at the University of Texas at Austin, and she's held that position since June of 2022. Kim Scott, who's the Vice Provost for Student Success at Texas A&M University and has held that position since August of 2022. And last but certainly not least, John Wiebe, who's Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Texas at El Paso, and he's held that position since March of 2020. Wow, we can start in a lot of different ways, colleagues. So let's just start with, what are your first impressions? You've had a chance to read the report. You've had a chance to hear from Beth and Steve. Maybe John, we'll start with you. What are some of your thoughts and impressions about how this resonates with you and some of the wonderful activities that are happening at your institution?
Well, thank you, Archie. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today with so many colleagues from across the state who have a real shared sense of purpose, I think, around this report and its recommendations. So when you ask what resonates from the report, that's interesting to comment on from my perspective here at UTEP. I would say at UTEP, this report resonated from the title page, right, from the very beginning. The equity excellence imperative, the idea that equity is a necessary and defining precondition of excellence. So 35 years ago, long before the first Boyer report came out, UTEP started out on a strategy of pursuing excellence in the service of equity or access, building the infrastructure of an R1 university out here on the West Texas border in order to provide real opportunity to a region that had been historically underserved here. The report talks about, as you've mentioned, the fact that equity without excellence is an unfulfilled promise. And I think that's never been more accurate than it is today. In a globally competitive world like that we have today, access is essentially meaningless without excellence. If we can't prepare those whom we admit to compete globally, it may be that what we're providing isn't worth the cost. And the report asks, can we prioritize, invest in equitable undergraduate achievement? And I think that answer is a resounding yes from my experience here at UTEP. We at UTEP remain an R1 research university with an entirely open admissions policy, and that's deeply ingrained in our mission. And we use many of the strategies that are recommended by the Commission in order to support student success and to achieve persistence rates amongst our students that are comparable to selective institutions. There are a lot of ways in which we do that, some of which are in the report itself, and we certainly have been excited to learn from others who are cited in the report and other conversations that we've been having that are stimulated by the report. So that's been a lot of fun so far. We can talk about specific things that we do, I guess, as questions emerge here at UTEP, but I'm also really interested to hear from my colleagues on the call about what stood out in this report to them.
So Tim, yeah, what else stood out to you at Texas A&M about this?
Yeah, I would say that the equity lens, and whether that's in course redesign or monitoring high impact practice, advising holistically, what are we doing and are we intentional about measuring student success and disaggregating data, et cetera. You know, I will say that saw Steve at APLU, and this has become assigned reading for all of my direct reports and academic deans. And so we discuss it on a monthly basis. I think it's incumbent on us to, and most of us know the state that we live in and the politics that we are under is, I think this work has never been more critical. Sometimes it can't be as overt as we would like it to be.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back and have a deeper conversation about that, but let's go around and kind of hear from other people's first reactions. Hillary?
Hi, hi Archie, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I know that I'm supposed to be a serious panelist here, but I have to confess what a joy it is for me to, one, be among these colleagues, and two, get to talk about the Boyer 2030 report. It's just, this is the highlight of everything that I get to do. And so I'm so happy to be here. In preparing some things to talk about, the way that that I sort of fell into getting more involved with you, recently elected board member, is a conversation that began in just an informal discussion about student mental health. Archie was there, and we said, you know, I wish students didn't feel like they had to be perfect, but we essentially make them be perfect, because then they can't, you know, do all the things that we ask them to do if they get a C or if they fail a class. And so it started there, and then mental health. And so, you know, it sort of started with what is provocation number 10 in the report, which is, you know, eliminating barriers and thinking about student mental health and well-being. And, you know, are there things that we're doing on our campus that make it difficult for students to succeed? And can we change those? And more than that, what I realized is that the real inspiration for me in this report is provocation number 2 about free speech. And that surprised me. But the part that's so compelling, and if you have the PDF or your hard copy open, it's on pages, 19 and 20, is Dr. Claude Steele. He's the former provost at UC Berkeley. His remarks on free speech on the campus, which is, you know, none of us has a problem with free speech in practice or in theory. Well, in theory, we don't have a problem with it in theory, but in practice, what we worry about is that students aren't safe, right? And we have to build the trust of students, and that this is really the most fundamental thing that we do in higher education, right? Because our students can't learn, we can't be the force of change in education if we don't have the trust of our students. So this is where the good stuff lives for me. And, you know, in terms of things that we're sort of working on the ground, we're providing travel and conference registration for a national conference on race and ethnicity for staff across campus, so they can help create a more welcoming environment for our diverse population of students. We're providing travel and conference for the NASPA depression on college campuses. We are doing mental health first aid training with our advisors. We're doing an advising needs assessment, a high impact practices needs assessment to make sure that all of our students have access to the best practices and opportunities that we know. I could go on, but I'll relinquish to Archie.
Yeah, Wes, what would you like to add?
Sure, happy to join in, and let me just say also that I'm delighted to be part of this group. I want to say especially thanks for including a private university here. I would start out maybe just 2-3 points here. Start out by saying that the report obviously speaks to private universities just as it does publics. Our world is a little bit different, Tim. We're not, following the legislature on a daily basis or an hourly basis this time of year, every couple of years when they're meeting. But we do obviously pay careful attention and have to listen carefully what's going on there. But we work closely with our Board of Regents. That's more the governing body, of course, that we work with. What I would start out by saying is maybe zoom out a little bit and look at what UERU as an association is doing with this report is perhaps one of the most important things. And that is to reemphasize the importance of undergraduate education at research universities. Obviously, Beth mentioned this at the top of one of her PowerPoint slides there, but I think it's important for us to continue to do that, not just because the education of undergraduates contributes to the public good, but I would say because so many of the challenges that we face here in 2023 aren't going to be resolved with more knowledge, with more information, with more research. They are moral and they're social and they're political, if you will, in a good sense of that term, political. They're only problems we're going to solve with better educated citizens who have the moral capacity, the character, and the courage to take on racism, to take on climate change, to take on poverty. These are, just like you take a pack of cigarettes, it's sat on there for years that these cause cancer. Information is not the problem. People keep smoking and keep getting cancer. So it's something, I'm nothing against people who smoke. I'm just trying to make the point that knowledge in and of itself doesn't get the job done, and education is what enables us to do that. And research universities saying that, I think really matters. And from Baylor's perspective, we're a Christian research university, and we bring in another dimension to these conversations as people of faith who want to help us think through how to develop citizens who have another dimension that they can bring to these intractable social moral problems that we're not going to solve them all, but we can help our kids have the capacity to solve them. So I think those two are inextricably linked, and that point I think is laden throughout the report. I would also say here at Baylor, the report has really served to buttress, if you will, a lot of the initiatives we've already had underway, especially in the last couple of years. We made a significant investment, resource and energy-wise, in achieving R1 status, which we did a little over a year ago, and there was a lot of emphasis placed on that. And I'll say, as Baylor's Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, it was, the first 7 or 8 years were very different than the last 4 or 5, because the shift of there wasn't by no means any interest in harming undergraduate education, but it was basically, we've been doing that pretty darn well for 175 years. We want to keep doing it well, but let's focus over here. And now that we've achieved that, things have shifted a little bit, and the report's timing has really been helpful in that sense, for me, reinforcing the importance of undergraduate education. And within that, we've focused on 3. We recently wrote a strategic enrollment management plan, and it focuses on doing better with 3 specific populations of students that we know, based on data, historically haven't done as well with retention rates, graduation rates, and so on. And those 3 groups are underrepresented minority students, no surprises, with the first-gen students, and Pell eligible students. So we're now in a very healthy season as an institution where undergraduate education is as central as it has ever been, and we are dedicating resources and time and energy to helping those three populations. We've set specific goals and we're measuring that carefully. And I think making a strong impact. And the last thing I'll mention on that is, we're blessed to be able to work with our board and reallocate financial aid dollars to match what our priorities are. And we're working toward an affordability initiative that will cover 100% of tuition and fees for a certain threshold of students, well beyond Pell status, who have we're not quite sure what the annual income will be, but I'm hopeful that we'll get support from that for our board. That would, because that's where we are now. When we look at, for example, Pell students, the main reason, it's not academic, it's not so much fit, it's just the financial capacity to stay at Baylor beyond a couple of semesters. So I think the report has helped me to reinforce the significance of that, and with first gen students. And those are just a few. I'll stop there, but I could talk about 4 or 5 others, but those are the ones that stood out right away for me.
Well, thank you all for sharing your initial thoughts. There's been some really good things in the Q&A and in the chat. So again, as you have questions that you would like for us to address, please do put them in there. So I'm going to take one of the questions in there and kind of maybe take us a slightly different direction. So here in the state, we have 7 different public university systems. We also have a number of private institutions. We are not all working in our own silos. And so as you think about all the partnerships that you have, thinking about that last recommendation of working across institutions, right? It's not only going to be the R1s and the R2s that are going to ultimately help us. How do you think about the total collection of our colleagues at HSIs that are not research universities and are at community colleges, and how do they fit into us all collectively working on addressing this really important issue for the state of Texas? So anyone have any initial thoughts on that?
I think this is such an important question. And so I was the director of Texas Success Initiative for many years and taught integrated reading and writing for a long time. And here at UT Austin, we have a really small population of developmental education students compared to some other institutions in the state. And the thing that I found most important in that role is giving voice where I could to community colleges and in the larger regional 4 years, because they had so many more students impacted by those rules. And there's really there is a lot of equity issues tied up in that, as you can imagine, because our students of color and low income are more likely to be developmental students. So get your hands on good data. But so that's just one way. So if I was in a room where people were asking about equity, it may not have popped up like that on our campus with our students, but I was always paying attention to and talking to what the community colleges were saying in that space so that I could advocate on their behalf too. And I just think that's what we should all be doing all the time. We're all in this together.
Absolutely, I would agree. Certainly from our perspective, in a limited resource environment, those collaborations are absolutely essential. I think they're essential as at a micro level, but also at a macro level. And we focused, I think, over the last 35 years, much more at a micro level, and working, for instance, to develop relationship with community colleges that feed our enrollment pattern, and working on aspects of degree pathways, and making sure that we're that our relationship is as collaborative as it possibly can be, so that we're not in a competitive scenario with nearby institutions. I think more recently we've been thinking at a bit more of a macro level and collaborating with other HSIs, for instance, across the nation through entities such as the Hispanic Serving Research Universities Alliance, where we see if we're going to really make progress in, say, diversifying the professoriate and real progress on equity, it's groups like that are going to have to do that through a sense of shared purpose, some agreed upon goals and tracking metrics. Those data are so important, and sharing data with other institutions becomes vital. Start looking at so many of us have interventions that have worked where we are, but may not necessarily work in another context. So the richness of the data behind those interventions becomes really important. Just this week, that was brought home to me as we poured a lot of money into a new advising structure that it's virtually right out of the Boyer report, right? And we've just done that very recently, and we've been tracking the progress of that model. We were excited when Census Day came this semester, and we got news that persistence was up a bit, and we were so excited because we thought we could really, obviously we didn't see a causal relationship there, but then we were able to do an analysis looking at predicted versus observed persistence, because we all know that the students who came in, for instance, this year are quite different from students we've seen in the past and have a lot of risk factors, learning loss, and so many things that jeopardize persistence. And we were able to see that when we account for predicted scores, we see a much larger impact on persistence. Those sorts of data are absolutely invaluable in studying the impact of these sorts of models, but the type of model that we have is unlikely to have the same impact at a highly selected institution. And so it's only through sharing those data, I think, and collecting many of them in the same way, talking to one another before we collect them at times, that we're going to be able to have the sort of reach that we need to have beyond our own institutions.
Archie, I'll jump in and offer something if that's okay. This might be a bit on the philosophical or even theological end for a minute, but bear with me. When I read the report, and especially this point that there is no competition between equity and excellence, there's a 17th century Moravian bishop, a guy named John Amos Comenius, who wrote a book called The Great Didactic, and he is the philosophical father of this way of thinking. Whether he's not referenced in the report, but he's known as the father of universal education, who made the case that regardless of gender, racial background, ethnic background, ability, disability, no matter who you are, everyone is made in the image of God and deserves the same high quality liberal education as everybody else. He made no distinction for any human being. He was invited to become the first president of Harvard, but turned it down because he didn't want to come to the colonial United States. I mentioned that to say the point is, doesn't matter if a student comes to Baylor or they go to Rice, to UT Austin, Texas A&M, or they go to any of our community colleges, they should receive the same high quality undergraduate education in English and history and mathematics across the board. Does not matter. They all start at a different point, but we have a responsibility to make sure that the quality is the same regardless of the institution that they go to. That's how I interpret the equity and excellence, and that's how I see the institutions of different types holding together.
Wes, I think that's a really important point, right? We know throughout Texas, we have so many unbelievably talented, resilient students. Some of them have had experiences in higher ed. Some of them have never had any experiences in higher ed. And they all have all the talent and the drive, ambition to be successful at our institutions. And it's up to us to try to figure out how do we provide the supports that those students need in order to navigate. But so I want to go back to something, Tim, you said in your opening remarks, right? I mean, how do we make sure we make that case that is really important for our role of serving Texas, especially in some of the climates in which we are operating at this particular point? Do you have any ideas about how do we continue to do that?
Yeah, I think we lean into the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board building a talent strong Texas. And if our students, which are majority Hispanic in the state, don't achieve at same rates as other students, then Texas will be the poorer in every sense of the word than we have been in the past. And so I think we lean heavily into that. I think that equity-minded access is not equal access. It's meeting students where they are. So if I push for more open education resources, I'm looking for more equitable outcomes for low SCS students who may forego buying their textbook. And so I think we just have to continue to be deliberate and make that case and let our stakeholders know we're doing it in the best interest of the mandates we've been given by our boards, whether they be public or private.
Anyone else want to add? Well, very well said, Tim. So we're going to be running out of time soon if there are any other questions, but there was a question earlier about scale, and I want to kind of come back to this role, right? So we know the research is very, very clear that students who feel supported and feel that they belong at our institutions are going to have significantly better outcomes on a wide variety of metrics, right? But we are big institutions, you know. Excuse me, and it's expensive if you really want to think about that, doing that, you know, one-on-one person, or even 1 to 300 or whatever numbers that people are using in terms of advising. So where do you see as technology playing a role in here? And how do we ensure that as we bring technology in this conversation to support our students, we're doing it in a fair and equitable way that benefits everybody? I wonder if any of you all have thought about where technology fits in this scheme. Because we're going to have to use it. I mean, there's just no way to get around this without using it.
So we had an interesting discussion with a bunch of UERU folks 2 weeks ago about technology and advising platforms. I am sorry to say that we did not walk away from, there was almost 100 people in the discussion, and we didn't walk away with a solution. But we all similarly felt that, one, we really needed, you know, some technology to help us manage advising and to provide student success data, and that there were no good solutions, or, you know, there's pockets over here and some things do well in an area and not in others. So we're just starting a side gig over here to develop a advising platform, and y'all can all come help us do that. Not really, we're not, because we don't know how to do that. But if anybody knows how to, then there's a big audience for it.
Any other thoughts on the role of technology?
Well, I think technology today is absolutely essential to provide that kind of personalized attention at scale. I think for many years we've used that sort of well, we've used both a combination of data and technology to drill in and make sure that we're providing the kinds of advising and support to the students who most need it. We're spreading those scarce resources in the right ways. But even in the classroom, we've been using technology through, I think years ago, there was a package that called, I don't know if any of you used this, the package Zoom In, that became eventually Blackboard Retention Center, that allows faculty who teach very large classes to deliver really personalized messages to students depending on different criteria, whether the grade profiles or different, and those messages are received by students very often in a very personalized way. I think there are all sorts of ways with AI that we're going to see technology allow us to build those relationships with students at a scale that has not been possible previously. I think the challenge is institutions being able to access that technology equitably, right? And I think some of the institutions that most need it are some of those that are most challenged in being able to afford it and implement it.
Good point, John. So we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up. And so kind of as a final thought from each of you, there was a question earlier about, you know, as you think about the journey in which each of your institutions has been on in this work, there are going to be other institutions that are at a different point in the journey. What are the things that you think about early on that were really helpful as you started down this particular path that you would give as words of advice for those who will be following the wonderful examples that you all have set? So Hillary, I'll start with you. I'm going to go around my screen as I see you.
So this is a really important question, and UT Austin has been doing very good student success work for the past decade. And you just, if you're looking for a place to start, and this was in the Q&A, you really have to start with data. You just have to know what your students are doing and what it looks like, and you have to make partnerships with that. We struggle with the data relationship on our campus. I'm sure other folks have that, and it's not because we don't like each other, but it's because who has access to what and who's allowed to share what, and can we get the things we need when we need it. But it's so important to start with data.
Wes?
Sure. First thing that came to mind was Hillary's point about data, but given that she stole that one, you know, some combination of humility and persistence, I think, is what comes to mind for me. Meaning, you know, when I came into this role, I thought I knew a lot. I thought I knew a lot of people. I'd been to this campus for 11 years, and suddenly there were 250 more people for me to meet, and suddenly all this information that I was trying to make sense of. And so humility in the face of very difficult challenges with 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who are going through a critical period of their lives, trying to figure out who they are, what they want to be when they grow up. It's just a complicated, it's a fantastic, wonderful life to be able to speak into that and be a part of shaping people. But humility in the face of just a challenging world that we type of work that we do. But at the same time, you know, persistence. I've seen an institution, like I said, it's been around 175 years, you know, historically a Baptist institution. Probably no surprise that Baptists don't always want to change as quickly as perhaps some others, but change can happen. And I have seen major changes. I saw this place in March of 2020, as all of you did, go from, you know, what in the world, why would we ever teach an online class, to, you know, faculty members in the law school that have been teaching in one way for 45 years suddenly figure out how to do it. Change can happen, but you have to be persistent, and you have to have a goal, and you have to know what you know, what the leadership is supporting you in doing. And with persistence, change can happen, but it sometimes takes years to get there.
Tim?
Yeah, I would say, I think Hillary stole the thunder for all of us, but it's data, and it's retention year to year, it's graduation, it's time to degree. It is disaggregated, and I think you need to look at as many different populations as you can collect. Certainly ethnicity, socioeconomic, first generation status come to mind. Course level data is very eye-opening. And then for the services, the wraparound services that you provide, who is using those, and do you have the space and the bandwidth to handle the students who need to use them, and how do you market to them? I think those are the issues that I think about are ways to start. And the other is try not to get discouraged. It is easy to get discouraged in certain political climates. Reframe your argument. We did our QEP for SAC COC. We focused on first generation kids. We know that by doing that, we're going to hit many of the target audiences, and no one raised an eyebrow.
John, I'll give you the penultimate word.
Sure. Well, I think my colleagues have really summarized it. Hillary and Tim talked about the data, which are absolutely essential. Wesley about persistence. You know, I think the data are valuable to the extent that they chart a course, but also to the extent that they facilitate communication. And I think we're all very fortunate in the academy that many of our colleagues are open to a data-based argument. And if we and I think, you know, just thinking back to the report recommendations to provosts and presidents, really the focus on the data, the focus on persistence, but the focus on communication, and really that persistence in communication that's organized around the data, that is absolutely necessary to culture shift, sharpening that message. So often in administration, we are effective if we say exactly the same thing again and again and again. But it's important to sharpen that message so that it resonates and that it's informed by data. And I think that's, you know, we were fortunate at UTEP to have very strong central leadership on this exact mission for 30 years. Not everybody has that benefit of persistence, but we can all, I think, sharpen the message and build it around data.
Yeah, well, again, I want to thank you all, Hillary, John, Wes, and Tim, for your time. You know, the only thing I would add here, you know, I think policy is another area that we need to look at as well. That is one of the areas where our students interact with what it is that they learn about our values through policy. And so making sure that our policies are clear, making sure that our policies have the intended consequence that we want them to have is something that we also, and that gets informed by data, by looking at how do policies affect students as they go through. And that can be anything from, you know, withholding transcripts to pass, fail, you know, continuing on in classes, a whole wide variety of different stuff. I know the curricular analytics project that is being done through UERU is a really good way of looking at that particular aspect in terms of the complexity of our data. So Serenity, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Archie. I'm Serenity King. Like Jessica, I'm at UT Dallas, and I also have the honor of serving as president of TCCAO. We are going to continue this conversation at our April TCCAO meeting. As Archie just alluded to, there's some aspects that we haven't quite touched on, and there's going to be many layers to these conversations as we embark on this work, not only within our institutions, but across them. I'm very happy about the potential to have further conversations with institutions not represented here today, additional private institutions and others as well. Steve, are there any upcoming events that Texas institutions could be involved in?
Well, we're super excited, Serenity, to have Texas well represented in our organization. As you can imagine, people all over the country learn a lot from what's happening in Texas. And our next in-person event will be held at Temple University, May 31 through June 2nd. We'll be talking a lot about curricular analytics at that meeting, but other topics as well.
Great. Thank you for that. With that, I will close it out by again thanking everyone. Steve, Beth, thank you for the overview. Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you, Dr. Holmes, for moderating. And a special thank you to Risa McGuire of CPUPC for organizing this with Liz and others. Greatly appreciated. And thank you to our attendees.